Good morning. Welcome into another NBA strategy show. We appreciate you hanging with us, riding with us for the next hour. We'll get you ready for this big Clippers-Suns game, game 4 now. And we have a couple of things to look at. Yes, the return of Chris Paul back in effect, but 2 injuries as well. But we also need to look at what happened last night. And I don't mean me staying up for now 36 straight hours, but the big game last night and how we, not necessarily me, but Rinpack, Rayen, of course, warned you about what could happen with Trae Young, what could happen with the Atlanta Hawks. But let's bring him in. Of course, you can follow him on Twitter at Rinpack, myself at Shander Show. Good morning. I think it's morning, mainly because it's 10 a.m. and I could see the clock. But other than that, I wouldn't know what time it is, my friend. It's always a pleasure, though, and we have a lot to talk about. But first and foremost, good to see you in, what has it been, less than 12 hours since we last broke bread.
Yeah. So we're right back at it this morning to talk, kind of recap what happened last night and talk about tonight's signature game 4 between the Clippers and Suns. Last night, the Bucks came out and looked like the Bucks that they needed to look like. They came down and steamrolled the Hawks, and they made adjustments on Trae Young. Trae Young was awfully uncomfortable throughout the 2.5 quarters. He could only play just because they were getting beat by 40 points to the point where Budenholzer challenged a play up 40 points, which blew my mind to challenge a call up 40. But it was, for me, where things went wrong was I was above the field on Capella. He was awfully disappointing, and I was under the field on Brook Lopez. And you needed Lopez in that optimal lineup. Shout out to Alex Awesemo. And he took out first in both sites, DraftKings and FanDuel. And it worked out for him. He had Cam Reddish on FanDuel and Onyeka Okongwu on DraftKings. And just looking at the rotations, I think if you were to play out the whole game in a different game streak, I do think we were on a pretty good path. Brook Lopez was hyper efficient with the blocks and steals, hit some corner threes. So that panned out for him. But outside of that, I think we had a good feel. We were pretty high on the Bucks. All 3 of the studs outperformed Trae Young, which I kind of advocated for our Yahoo sponsor show, and that would have panned out for you. But it's just in a one game in a series like that, studs can have disappointing games if they make adjustments like the Bucks did and Budenholzer did on Trae Young. And Trae Young was disappointing. He, I believe, was the highest scoring fantasy point Hawk, but it didn't matter because he pretty much was almost outscored by PJ Tucker, who had 20 3/4 points. And if you were to look at the optimal math it out, I think Chris Dunn would have cracked the optimal just because of the blowout run he got, because he was the man and he, I believe, put up 10, 11 fantasy points, and he would have been essentially the same lineup that was tied 6 or 7 ways. Dunn would have replaced Onyeka Okongwu, and that would have been the optimal over there on DraftKings. But just being under the field on Brook Lopez, he just performed really well in those minutes he played, and Capella just didn't. That was like the key turning point. Those little things here and there can be the difference of being up a lot and down a lot on a one game slate like last night.
There you see it. Our boss, of course, tied for a couple of people tied for first, but this wasn't like a 50 first place tie. So Alex doing some work on DraftKings and FanDuel, I believe tied for first in both runs last night. Also a shout there, Anthony Marcus on the stream. We have the stream up, Super Chat, the premium Slack as well. Good call on Young Rinpack last night. You got a couple of we talked about this too. Now, again, and you even mentioned it, so I want to give you the props there as far as taking a little deeper and specifying that it's pretty difficult to prepare in general for this, but when you get to a playoffs and when you get to series where teams have played a couple of games, even if it's just one game where the road team steals, blowout mode is in effect. And you do at some point have to prepare, even if it's not creating a general blowout level lineup, you do have to kind of prepare for that. And we talked about that when we gave people a good 15 minutes, maybe 10 minutes of content on kind of how to prepare individually for blowout mode, especially because I think from the game feel last night, heading into that game last night, we kind of expected that Milwaukee's going to bounce back and maybe not up by 25, 26, 30 at some point, but definitely bounce back and lay that smackdown. So that's something that I think was definitely proper, and that we explored it and even helped you specifically help people prepare for that. Because look, it can happen in any game, in any moment, especially as you get deeper into these series where teams kind of get a feel for who they're going up against in rotations as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's and like something that worked out on both sides. Okongwu got the first half of blowout run. Cam Reddish got extended blowout run on FanDuel. And that's all that you really needed. You didn't need to have multiple guys from the blowout run. You just had to get the right one. And it happened to be a workout on both sides like that. It doesn't always work out on both sides like that. It's just that there was so much blowout run. There was about 15 minutes of basketball, real time basketball that we got blowout run and no studs. And it just panned out that way. And the puzzle fit like that. And sometimes it won't work out. It's just that you got to mix and match some sort of game script environments if you're building multiple lineups and just trying to find the way to be unique. I unfortunately didn't land on that type of lineup. I just missed out on that. And we go on to the next day. That's the beauty of DFS. You try to have a short memory and you try to bounce back the next day.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. Look, and again, that's one of these small, like that was a punt scenario, right? The Bucks up by 30 at one point. I got in at 25 and a half. Just to throw a half a unit on there thinking, yeah, I could take 25 and a half points in a playoff game. And that didn't hit. I mean, the Milwaukee mentioned Budenholzer challenging a play up by 40, right? At one point, right? So this was a message. This was, game one was a mistake. Game one was not who we are. We come back in resounding fashion. Now we have to deal with a little bit of a different scenario tonight where I don't think that blowout mode plays into anywhere near effect that we saw last night. Last night was kind of an easy narrative to buy into. All right, look, the Bucks lose. Now they come back and they smash. We're a little bit deeper now into this series here, and I'm just curious how you approach the slate, the strategy. We talked about that last night, kind of the one-game showdown slate mode, captain mode, but also looking at the narrative kind of now with this series as we have another game with the Clippers. Chris Paul's back. We do have to factor in Marcus Morris is a game time decision. It does look like Payne's going to play through that ankle, so no real concerns there, but at least there is something on the injury report. So how do you kind of see this game unfold as we start to look at some plays too?
For sure. Immediately when I bounce to a next game, I try to look at guys who had disappointing games when I think who can immediately bounce back, just because of recency bias involved. For example, yesterday, the guy who I was thinking that could bounce back even more than he did was Chris Middleton. Obviously, the minutes didn't really matter for him to bounce back, but I think he goes on to having a really good game. I think he just falls shy of a triple-double situation, which is really impressive from Chris Middleton. Now, going on to today's game 4 between the Suns and the Clippers. So Suns are up 2-1. Clippers have know what's down to be 0-2 for the third straight series. So guys who had disappointing games last time out, right off the top of the head, Devin Booker. If he's going to say the mask did not bother him, I think he's lying. The mask definitely played an effect to a new game sort of environment. He didn't look as comfortable getting into his own shot, obviously. The Clippers threw a lot at him. Patrick Beverley was a hound, for better or for worse, the type of defensive types of play. He definitely agitated him, annoyed Devin Booker all throughout game 3, and it worked out. We saw a starting lineup change in game 3 where Terrence Mann entered the starting lineup. Marcus Morris and his knee injury went to the bench. So the Clippers rolled out Jackson, Pat Bev, Terrence Mann, Paul George, and Ivica Zubac as the starting lineup. Zubac was absolutely sensational. He's been on the court essentially the whole time. Eytan is on there, and Zubac was absolutely outstanding, being in the winning captain lineup on DraftKings the other night. And he comes in at a very solid price tag where, man, it's going to take a lot for him to fail at that price tag, even though it did go up by a little bit. Coming in at that $6,300 price tag, went up $1,100. So that's something to look at that captain price tag. Comes in at $4,200 on DraftKings. Man, Zubac, I'm just looking, I was like, wow, he's such a great play. And now I think guys like Chris Paul and Devin Booker should bounce back. So naturally, I'm going to find a way to get a little tad bit over the field on them, just because I think they have a pretty solid upside. Their minutes are always going to be constantly same, high 30s, potentially low 40s minutes. So that's where I'm looking at. Where can I just fill out this puzzle of today's slate? Immediately, I'm looking at Zubac continuing to be good with those minutes, and then Chris Paul and Booker to bounce back. We already know who Paul George is, and I think the field is accurately going to be there. So I'm just going to come in potentially with the field. So just mixing and matching who can bounce back. So looking at Paul and Booker are the first two guys I think can bounce back for sure.
Yeah, and I'm curious just to further explore whenever we have a situation like Zubats, right? And we talked a little bit about last night working in this guy, whoever it may be on the slate, that and looking at 4,200 for a utility spot on DraftKings, knowing that you're going to pay a little more, as you mentioned, for the captain spot. The only, I don't even think it's a concern, but the only thing that I guess we look at now is ownership and how many other people are on the Ivica Zubac train, especially for captain mode. So clearly you're running a bunch of rosters in a tournament. You want to have, I imagine, some decent exposure to him as a captain. But outside of him, we're going to have obvious ones, right? Paul George, I'm crunching a couple of lineups with our own projections here on DraftKings. And clearly, the majority of 90% of my lineups are Paul George with captain, Paul George with captain. So I know that, right, Ryan, that not only am I going to get that, but everybody else is going to get that. So where do we start to pivot both at top away from Paul George and maybe a little bit lower away from Zubac? Because I think, to your point, both of these guys are going to come out as solid options, but also pretty high owned as well.
For sure. And on a slate like today, it is tough to pivot off Paul George, in my opinion, just because I feel really confident that he's going to play those low 40s minutes, going to take mid to high 20 shot attempts. He's going to get to the line. He's been playing really good basketball. The 15 rebounds, a little bit higher than I expect to happen. So I expect that number to go down. I potentially see him to get more free throw attempts. So it's tough for me to pivot off of Paul George. And I think there's enough value to just jam him in. Another development that happened in game 3, we saw no Rondo and Cousins. Those minutes went to Kennard and Terrence Mann mainly, and then Batum and Morris got them sprinkled in. So Rondo and Cousins have left the rotation. And then with the way things worked out in game three, I expect them not to be back in the rotation in game 4. So it's kind of a clearer picture of what the rotation looks like. And I just think there's enough value to get in Paul George in your lineups today, and really hard to miss out on. I just feel like his floor is high 40s, low 50 fantasy points, and he's just been outstanding without Kawhi Leonard. So really tough for me to pivot off of Paul George. If you think he has a bad game, if you were to see what a lineup looks without Paul George, I just feel like you're sacrificing a lot of raw points, which is really you're going to need on a one-game slate. And it's like, if you think Paul George has a bad game, it's pretty much implying that you think the Clippers overall are going to have a pretty poor game, and the Suns kind of run away with things. And we saw what can happen when a team runs away with things. A stud has a poor game. So if you predict that type of game script, it could work out for you. But the way the spread is indicating, the way the Phoenix is only a 1-point favorite, I just expect this game to stay a bit closer.
You want to make sure you're using everything that we have available to you. So today, for example, the free premium tool, NBA player rankings, we have MMA fighter rankings, MLB player rankings, all free for you today. Make sure you like, subscribe to the channel. We don't ask much. Maybe, you never know, we get another whiskey shot from Rinpack before we get out of here. It's early in the morning, so I don't want to set the bar so low at 500 likes. If we get 750, we'll see how he feels about shooting a quick little glass of whiskey on your way out. A great toast last night, and you have the people begging for more. You know that, right? You can't just drip, and then leave and not bring out more whiskey the following day, the next show. You know that, right?
It's going to be a tough one to pull off at 10:17 in the morning, but we'll see if the likes get up there, and maybe we can do something special yet again.
Fair enough. Just make sure that once you're subscribed, you hit the notification bell as well. You don't want to miss any show. If it's strategy early in the morning, we've got you covered. NBA, MLB, MMA, all in a row. Bang, bang, bang. Live before lock. We'll get you later in the night as well, leading up to the game. But, as far as just, you mentioned pivoting away from George, and I think clearly in the lineup, especially as a utility or just a slot in either DraftKings or FanDuel, that's a must. But I did crunch just to take him out of the captain role. And I am crunching just to see what I can get overall. Now, again, Zubac is going to be the guy, 40% of my lineups coming up with him as the captain. But then it opens up. And you're going to have some obvious choices for Phoenix, right, with Devin Booker and Chris Paul, if you really want to maximize the two studs there. but there's also some pretty good workability, I think. And one of them is Terrence Mann that you mentioned, trying to work a lower cost option at captain. But let's just look at the captain MVP spot here, if we can, real quick. And we know Paul George, we know Zubac's there as far as those two guys that I think a lot of people are going to lean on. Outside of that, now it does become the kind of the captain MVP pivot. Bridges, Terrence Mann kind of in that middle spot, but then you also have a lot of exposure to Devin Booker, and I'm sure Chris Paul, kind of some studs at top as well.
Yeah, so it's so Devin Booker has been disappointed the last two games, 5 of 21, 5 of 16. He's a better shooter than this. Obviously, he's going to lose out on ball handling duty with Chris Paul back in the picture. Maybe Chris Paul and Monty Williams drop a game plan for Booker to get going offensively more in this game, trying to find more open looks for him. I'm not too sure on how that's going to pan out. There is a big price. There's a $1,000 price difference. $1,000 can do you a lot between Chris Paul and Devin Booker. I'm okay pivoting down to Chris Paul on a slate like today. I just think Chris Paul just gets involved more in more ways fantasy wise. I don't think there's any conditioning issues as he played 39 minutes. I expect him to go better than 5 of 19 from the field. You like that he had 12 assists. He was involved in the peripherals ways. So I think Chris Paul and Devin Booker are in good positions to bounce back. I prefer Paul to Booker by a little bit. And maybe that ownership difference for me might be one way to get different, just having more Paul than Booker. Additionally, looking back at the Clippers guys, the constants in this series, I feel like, are Paul and George and Zubac. We've seen Reggie Jackson consistently play high 30s minutes. His minutes fell to low 30s last game out, but still, yet again, was very, very good. Respects Reggie. I mean, I think someone's calling him Mr. June with the way he's been playing. So it's been quite the revelation for Reggie Jackson in the playoffs. He's been great offensively, kind of not carrying the load, but helping out Paul George carry the load without Kawhi Leonard. I like Terrence Mann at that price tag. I think if you don't want to play Zubac and you want to pivot and you have enough money to go up to Terrence Mann, let's say Zubac gets in some sort of foul trouble, struggles, doesn't play the low 30s minutes like he's played the last two games out. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Zubac is in a position to produce better fantasy-wise. Terrence Mann is going to have to do a lot more scoring, 6 to 8 from the field. That's really efficient shooting. I don't expect that to sustain, but we've seen him light up the court a couple of times in the playoffs. So that's just a pure ownership pivot tournament play. But Terrence Mann has that upside. We've seen it over and over again. And if you fall on both Zubac and Mann, completely fine. That's a lot. That's really good value to jam in other really solid stud options on the slate. So it's a slate where the overwhelming value is not cheap like last night. It's just a lot of low price guys that just fit the puzzle really well. So it is the amount of good lineups you can make and like be with the field. It seems like there's not as many good lineups you can make like yesterday just because of the less amount of studs involved. I just think the field is accurately with the ownership is like they have a good feel on how this is going to go as well.
Yeah, it's going to be Rondo or Kennard, right? So somebody random in the optimal lineup when we're all said and done and look back and say, look, we told you that. It feels like it's going to be a lot more spread out. And again, depending on how game flow goes and if, in fact, we do see a team up by a significant amount of points. And Paul George from captain mode and DraftKings is one thing where people are getting to Zubac a little bit more on DraftKings, but even crunching on FanDuel, he's 100%. He pops up for the MVP slot. So I imagine that there isn't really much option out there to pivot away from him, knowing that you're not going to, the price break and all doesn't happen there. So as far as the MVP slot on FanDuel, pretty much locked into Paul George across the board here.
Yeah, Paul George is a elite MVP option, even if you're playing a Yahoo, the superstar option. 2-point multiplier on Paul George when he is the lead dog on this offense. Shot volume is great. Rebounding peripheral has been great a couple times throughout the series. He's getting involved in the assist wise as well, getting to the line. There's so many boxes that check off for Paul George, and he's all not that crazy expensive. He's only $1,000 more than Chris Paul, and he's only $1,000 more than Devin Booker. And that $1,000 and to just pay up for Paul George today makes a lot of sense. in my opinion. And Paul George is in a great spot just to continue to contribute offensively and fantasy wise for us as well.
Do you think we see something similar with Booker tonight, that we saw with Trae Young? And I'm concerned. I'm concerned because on the surface, like we said last night, when it comes out of my mouth, yeah, I'm going to fade Trae Young, or I'm not going to get to a lot of Trae Young. It just doesn't feel right. And the same thing about Devin Booker. But to your point earlier about his struggles, Chris Paul is back. Clearly, they're going to try and work around that as opposed to continue to force feed Booker ridiculous or tough looks. So there's a path to a Suns victory where Devin Booker does not need to be the lead dog. Mm-hmm. And I guess from a DFS standpoint, Ryan, that kind of concerns me about heavy rostering of Booker today.
Yeah, and we saw Pat Beverly give him a tough time. The mask, him wearing a mask I don't think by any means helps Devin Booker. If anything, it makes him a bit more uncomfortable. He was talking about what they did with his nose nose surgery, mini surgery. They had to numb it down. Usually when someone breaks the nose, they have to re-break the nose and put it back in place. So he's dogging through with his nose injury. And a masked Booker, it's not as nice as an unmasked Booker. Just as simple as that. Devin Booker is an elite offensive talent. Yes, can he get going with his mask a couple more days of getting more comfortable? Yeah, it could definitely happen, but there's just like less opportunities for him to be absolutely sensational like he was in game one. Less ball handling duty with Chris Paul. We saw that potentially he could play some backup point with no campaign. It didn't happen as much as they just kind of ran away with things, the Clippers in the third quarter. So I'm a little bearish on Devin Booker today. Just by a tad bit. I just think maybe I can be a little bit under the field on him just because, yeah, it is kind of scary missing out on a potential 40-point explosion from Devin Booker, but right. I'm going to have to make some sort of stand and decision. So that's going to be one of them.
I'm going to tail it. All right. So if it doesn't work, you can call me out as the mush here. All right. But I'm going to tail it. And I needed Rinpack to come out and tell me it was going to be okay, because I can't make that proclamation. The stream knows they're not going to believe anything that I say. So we needed your authority to come out there and say, it's all right. It's okay. If you want to be underweight, not fade them entirely, but if you want to be underweight to the field, then that's an okay thing to do.
Yeah. And, we also, that's completely fine. I think it's a 1-game slate. We've seen studs fail, and sometimes it's if two studs are going to smash, it's going to have to be a super high scoring game, an overtime game on the same team, and also the salary being a factor. So there are pathways where both Chris Paul and Devin Booker can be very, very good. It just doesn't happen as much as you'd think.
You mentioned Terrence Mann, kind of the adjustment that we saw game 3 in the lineup, and there are only real 2 injuries to look at here. It doesn't look like there is a real concern about Payne, although he was listed as questionable with that ankle. He's been upgraded now to probable. So we can start there and then look a little bit deeper as far as Morris, who's now a game time decision. But as far as campaign is concerned, I can't imagine, like, if you're not going to play Cameron Payne, and you're not going to get to a lot of Cameron Payne today, I can't imagine that it's because of his ankle injury. It's probably because you were already not going to get to a lot of Cameron Payne. So I don't know how much the ankle injury impacts your decision to roster him tonight.
Yeah, campaign's simply just too expensive. $6,800 at $10,500 on FanDuel. Man, to say Patrick Beverly's potentially can outscore him, yeah, I think it'll happen. You're saving $3,000 to Pat Bev over there in DraftKings. You're saving $1,500 on FanDuel. Campaign had an absolutely sensational run. Just the sites have not adjusted his price tag for his new role on the team with Chris Paul returning. It worked out for me. Not playing any campaign in game 3. It's going to be tough for me to land on any campaign in game 4. It's just the nature of the minutes and the salary. It's just there's not enough minutes for him to succeed at that salary, in my opinion. And that's why I'm just not really excited to play campaign. And he has shown the ability to light it up off the bench. But even with that salary, he has to put on a game 1 or game 2 and game 1 performance. And I just don't think it's as likely.
Yeah, especially with that price. I mean, if that tag's dropped, just a hypothetical, if that tag is dropped a little bit, do you start to work them a little more? knowing that he at least has that potential. You mentioned coming off the bench. He's got a pretty big boom rate where he can get you some points. He can get you some productivity in some small amount of time off the bench.
Yeah, and for me to really look to roster campaign, he'd have to be $1,500 to $2,000 cheaper.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, so I'm not that excited to go to campaign just because he's gonna play high teens and minutes as his ceiling for me, barring any foul trouble, and that's not enough at 6,800 and 10.5. It's just simply not enough.
It looks like we're really dealing with one game time decision. We'll talk about Marcus Morris and how that impacts the lineup. We also told you, though, that we have some great free premium tools for you today. One of them here, the NBA player rankings. So why wait? Why wait once a week for your favorite premium tool to be free when you can just pop on to Awesemo Plus? It's $29.95 a week. It's simple. It's easy. And you get access to everything. So we have 3 shows in a row here as far as us, NBA, and then MLB strategy show. We have an MMA early lock. You have everything available to you at the touch of your fingertips. Awesemo Plus, $29.95. And if you want to jump it up to Awesemo Plus Platinum, we welcome that. And we actually have a reward for that where you can sign up Awesemo Plus Platinum, use our promo code NBA Strategy Show. It's all caps. It's one word. It's the name, as you see right there, of this show. Use that for 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. It's amazing. You can play NBA DFS, the weekly express package, Awesemo Plus, or the NBA Showdown single game contest. But look, the NBA season is coming to a near end. So you want to be prepared for baseball, for MMA, for golf, for all these other things up until football. And that's why we welcome Awesemo Plus and then Awesemo Plus Platinum. So let's look at Marcus Morris here. The game time decision with the knee. We saw the roster already impacted, the rotation at least. Game 3 bumped up with Terrence Mann. I don't know, and based off of that, I don't know how much the injury is going to impact minutes per se, because it looks like they're still going to go with that same roster that they, or rotation starting lineup, if you will, that they went with game 3. So I don't know if this maybe is just a further reinforcement of not getting to Morris as much, because he'll play, but it looks like he's going to play through a knee injury, and already we had minutes in question.
Yeah, so the interesting about Marcus Morris for me, now coming off the bench, his role is a little bit different, where he's going to kind of be expected to kind of like lead the second unit in terms of getting shot attempts, going a little bit offensively, potentially. He's going to be sharing the court with guys like Nick Batum, potentially maybe a little backcourt run with Terrence Mann, Patrick Beverley. There's a chance that he doesn't share the court as much with Paul George. It's tough for that to happen when Paul George is playing 43 minutes, but there's an opportunity for him to take more shot attempts than just 4. I think there's a chance for that to get going. And I don't mind taking some chances on a Marcus Morris at that $5,000 price tag off the bench. He's going to be very kind of low on for a 1-game slate. And I don't mind it. His minutes stayed the same. He still found a way to play 24 minutes. I like 24 minutes Marcus Morris off the bench than 24 minutes Marcus Morris starting, just because I just think there's could be more shot volume potentially for him to succeed more. $10,000 price tag on FanDuel. I'm not as excited. There's some cheaper guys that I'd rather take some chances on than him. So $5K on DraftKings, he's grades out as an okay play. Tournament only play. It's just that he doesn't project all that great, but I just think he could spike a ceiling game, get going from the outside, get that 3-point bonus on DraftKings, get some rebounds potentially. And there's a chance where, let's say Zubac gets in foul trouble, yep, Morris and Batum can get those minutes. So there's some pathways for him to succeed and pay off a $5,000 DraftKings 1-game price tag today. So yeah, I think it's okay to come in a little bit over the field. I'm not going to be actively trying to do that. I think just having exposure to Marcus Morris, and I think that's completely fine.
Feels like, and we're going to do this before we get out of here, right? Build the optimal lineup. But it feels like we're going to be kind of similar to last night, where there's going to be a heavy amount of Clippers, and you're going to work in maybe 1.5 Suns, depending on the lineup there. And I imagine that the majority of those lineups. Now, again, if there's a Torrey Craig cheap option that people slide in, I get that. But I guess what I'm saying is I'm feeling as we get closer and closer to the optimal lineup before we get out of here that we're going to have a good amount, maybe like all Clippers and Chris Paul, for example, with Paul George as our captain.
Yeah, it could definitely happen. The Clippers are favorably priced, and the sites have not done a good enough job of adjusting their price tag. That annoys me when provide DFS sites don't adjust their prices enough. I mean, they have usually 24 hours to make adjustments, and like potentially Zubac in this new role, you can make an argument he's $2,000 too cheap. It's just 33 minutes of a center. It's disappointing. It kind of ruins the fun of the game where you can't really mix and match as much, and that leads to even more duplicated lineups on a one-game slate. And sorry to go on a little rant there, but
go ahead. We need it.
It's disappointing when sites don't adjust the simple salaries of that, and they usually are a couple games behind. For example, Payne in his new role should be $2,000-$3,000 cheaper. It just simply should be the case there. Those guys that get a little too lazy in the playoffs, it's unfortunate. It's usually when a lot newer casual players come in, and it just kind of ruins the fun when we have so much data involved, and you just can't use all the data to its fullest. So when the salaries are just not accurately priced like that at times, when there's not enough, there's just a lot of mispricing, and it's unfortunate. But circling back to what you were saying,
I love it, by the way.
In the
get it all out.
A little Saturday morning rant, but just
it.
looking at things, the constants on the Phoenix side of things, Chris Paul, Booker, and Ayton, we know that they're going to play mid to high 30s minutes barring any foul trouble, injury, and they should be in positions to produce. Ayton just missed out on a double-double the other night. He would have had an even better fantasy production day if he gets that 10th rebound. So little things like that add up. Mikal Bridges got in some early foul trouble. That's why his minutes were down. I expect some minutes to go up for him. So he has shown some games where he has been very nice to us fantasy-wise in the Denver series. He's obviously brought on to man Paul George matchups. A lot of his energy exertion is on the defensive end. We know he can get going from the outside. He's a very good steals and blocks guy. His scoring works out in FanDuel. A starter who's going to be low owned. I'm always going to have interest in a player like Mikal Bridges like that, just because he's a starter who can play high 30s minutes, and he's going to his ownership doesn't simply show that he's going to play those type of minutes. So I'd like to be a little bit over the field on that. And looking at the optimal, it seems like I'm more of a Clippers heavy day. The ownership also indicates that, but with the Phoenix favorite being 1 on the road, I'm willing to have a little bit more Phoenix than the public will. I like them to bounce back, especially their studs in Booker and Paul. And I think that difference alone will make my lineups a little more unique than the rest of the field. And I think that's how I get different on the field, just having more Phoenix than the Clippers in my lineups. It's not as exciting a Clippers team being on the home. I just think they're in a more of a position to succeed. They're priced more favorably. But I just think forcing in a little bit more Phoenix than Clippers will make your lineup different. And the upside is still there. And being a little unique, it can go a long way. Instead of being duped 100, 200 times, you're being duped less than 10 times. And that's really, really powerful on a one-game slate.
So there are a couple of guys that I'm curious how we can apply your strategy of being a little more overweight, I guess, to the field with a Suns player or two than the public, who's probably just going to jam in as many Clippers as possible with Zubac or George as captain, and then slide in if it's Chris Paul or Devin Booker. Bridges, I love 5,400, very workable. And I think you're right, where the average, maybe the casual, if you will, looks at him and maybe just looks at an immediate performance and would stay away. But the price is definitely workable. And you know that he can score as well as get you some really good defensive stats up there to boost his, again, minutes. It's all about minutes, right? And also looking at kind of in that similar range, you mentioned Ayton, 8,200. The only concern I would have with Ayton is just, is he, and I know it's a one-game slate and all, but is he too much? Before I hit this other name I was going to throw at you, Ryan, is and not too much in general, but if you're making that tough decision, Are you going to fade Booker or Ayton, knowing that you're going to save some money with Ayton, but you still have this ridiculous propensity, if you will, for Booker to go off, even though I think both of us believe he's not going to go off?
Yeah, so it all comes down to what you're going to do with those $2,600 on savings on DraftKings. Who are you going to be upgrading to? Is it going to be another Sun? Is it going to be another Clipper? So what you do with those $2,600 will be the telling point. And now, if you're going to look at a raw points potential, can Ayton outscore Booker? It can happen. And obviously, it doesn't happen as much as the other way around, but it can definitely happen. There are a lot of things indicating where Booker isn't as successful. He's lingering with a facial injury, wearing a mask. Ayton is still the roles, minutes, barring foul trouble, should all stay the same. So, Ayton, I don't mind if you want to pivot, and if you want to leave some money on the table on a one game slate, it's completely fine. Some lineups, if you're like, Booker's not gonna outscore Ayton, that's one way to get really different. Just leaving $2,600 on the table and just pivoting down to Ayton in some lineups, but not something that I actively do. Sometimes it works out like that. It's going to come down to game script and who gets going. I like Ayton. I think he's going to play those high 30s minutes. So he has Monty Williams' trust. And he has, I think he should get that double-double. He just missed out the other day. There was a big controversy on sports betting prop Twitter. A lot of people thought he should have been awarded that 10th rebound. There was one of our subscribers missed out on a 10-leg parlay because of that. Oh. So really a brutal bad beat there. So there's some sort of technicalities why Ayton didn't get that 10th rebound. So I hope he gets it today.
Yeah, usually the books are forgiving, right? It's DFS where, John Rahm withdraws with COVID. The books are going to pay that out as a win. Mm-hmm. You're screwed to high heaven and back on DFS tournaments.
Definitely. So that double-double bonus goes a long way on DraftKings. Yep. 1.5 points is the difference of you coming first and like 1,000 at times. It's just like that can be a huge difference on these one-game slates. So keep that in mind. Now, with someone that I think is going to be overowned, just because of Mikal Bridges' foul trouble last time out, is going to be Cam Johnson. Cam Johnson, someone who played 30 minutes. That, I think, is his minute ceiling. Someone who can obviously get going from the outside. Was known as the best shooter in the draft. A lot of people were shocked that he went so early. But I just think he doesn't play 30 minutes. His minutes are more like 20, 21 minutes. So that's why I'm a little more, I'd be coming under the field on Cam Johnson, price up at 4K now. So I expect those minutes to drop and Mikal Bridges to pick that up. Bridges fell in some foul trouble the other last game out. So keep that in mind. And I think box score watchers are going to jump to Cam Johnson seeing that performance. So that's where another way to get a little under the field, in my opinion, what I'll be also kind of actively trying to keep in mind of heading into tonight's slate.
Let me throw one name out, and then we'll tell everybody about some cool stuff happening here at No House Advantage. And just continue. We talk about Odd Shopper. NHA is another spot that I constantly use for just looking at bets, looking at props, even wagering, and using that as a guide. But I'm curious, and I wonder, 5,800, we're all talking right now as far as applying your strategy here to get that extra Suns player to kind of be a little bit over the field and maybe have that variable that differentiates your lineup from so many Clipper heavy lineups. And that's Jay Crowder at 5,800. I don't know now if that may be a little bit too much and maybe a deterrent for the average player to where maybe you can sneak in and say, look, I can deal with 5,800, where a lot of people may not be getting to Crowder for that reason.
Yeah, so Jay Crowder fouled out last game. So, yeah, I think he was on his way to playing north of 30 minutes. He did foul out. Jay Crowder is someone who hangs out in the perimeter on the offensive end and is just usually there when teams collapse on Booker and Paul or Ayton and they kick out to Crowder and it knocks on that open three, similar to a lot of other role players, wingmen on throughout the NBA. So 3-point bonus for Crowder, I do like that. And at that price tag, I think Crowder finds his way to playing 30-plus minutes. And I think he doesn't need to have a spectacular game at that price tag. He just needs to have a good game. And Crowder has that in his bag. And he's a starter who I think can play 30-plus minutes. I like going to Jay Crowder today I'm gonna try to get a little bit above the field on him, and I think there's a solid chance that he outperforms that price tag in this type of situation. So he's just one of those guys, an excellent tournament play, really a high risk, high reward, similar to, I guess, not to say a Gallinari type of player like last night, but similar mold. Gallinari doesn't start, but Crowder gets starters minutes, but they have that upside of just draining down some threes, getting going. So Jay Crowder at that salary, I do like going there, and that is the type of player that can make your lineup a bit different.
Well, you got to talk about a couple of punts as well and some cheaper cost options on both sides, and maybe there is some workability there. And speaking of Crowder, he, like everybody, up there on no house advantage, and just looking at a couple of projections, his points and assists, his PRA as well. And I mean, it's to your point where NHA no house advantage has him projected 13 points and assists, 17.89 points, rebounds, and assists, both heavy over, by the way, on what the line is. And then that just opens up the conversation about why you go to no house advantage for plays and projections. The line stays the same. You don't have to worry about jumping in and then news coming out and things working against your favor. This is locked. So if somebody has a projection right now and there's a concern about an injury 6 to 8 to 10 hours later, you don't have to worry about it. It's not going to move, and you're going to lock in with that value. And on top of that, I mean, it's everything. We've got over 500 player prop offerings, everything from basketball, baseball, golf. The NFL is right around the corner. Use our promo code Awesemo, and you'll get a $20 first match deposit bonus whenever you sign up for No House Advantage, which should be yesterday, to be honest. And again, I say this all the time, but it's true. Between Odd Shopper and No House Advantage, Ryan, I'm on these sites multiple times a day, not because of what we do as well, but also just because of the betting stuff and the regular radio stuff I do here in Philly, because it's just amazing to see the difference of No House Advantage, the projection, and then going to the book. And every now and again, you will get that where the book doesn't catch up. And that's how I think you apply everything that you have in front of you, right? You're using the information here for No House Advantage, and you say, wait a second, book X, they didn't update that. Let me jump in the over, let me jump in the under, whatever it may be. It's amazing.
For sure. And another powerful tool is also the optimal lineups to a No House Advantage. We literally are doing your homework for you, and how nice can we be? And take advantage of that. I don't know how much longer that's going to be free, so use the tool. Use that to your advantage. It's really hard to build any better lineups than that tool. And I tested it out the other day. No, those lineups that were coming out on the optimal lineups page did a lot of damage, and a lot of people who used them came up top. And smaller tournaments, sure, you're not going to be winning the massive 6-5-figure days, but it's a nice steady way to get that passive income if you can potentially take advantage of that tool. So use that tool, use that to your advantage. It's a great little site to play on, and supporting our sponsors helps us a long way.
Amazing, especially since, as you mentioned, free for now. And you never know. Like a gift like this, you never know. You want to be taking full advantage of that. And, also just going back to it real quick, because the optimal lineup is amazing, as well as what we have with the predictions. So a projections party, we just sort. You go to the under tab and sort. You go to the over tab and sort. And you can see, as Ryan said, I mean, this is the theme here for Awesemo, right? Is that we're doing the homework for you. You want to make sure that you're applying everything properly, but we're doing everything for you. So Terrence Mann, for example, right? He's projected at 5.13 rebounds. His line is only at 2.5. Now, I don't know if that's just not reflected from starting last time, if there's a concern that maybe minutes would be taken away, whatever the case may be, but that's nearly 3 full rebounds higher than the line that we have on NHA. So again, we have a 94% chance that smashes that over.
Oh, for sure. And that's like one of those things, those little edges, you keep adding those up, and you'll find many of those on No House Advantage. For example, in game 3, I was just hitting the under on the campaign props, and it worked out beautifully for many. And it was also hitting the over on the Zubac props, and that worked out really well. That starting lineup change did not help out for the Marcus Morris props last time out. Didn't help out for some of the Reggie Jackson props and little things like that. But it just they pan out in a way. So use that tool, that lineups page that's on the screen right now. Mixing and matching those lineups, you can even get a little different also. So that's a great foundation baseline to put you in the right spot. So definitely take advantage of this tool. It's really, really powerful, and it's unique. No one else has a tool like this. No. So that's what you guys should be doing, and it's just your homework is done. It doesn't get any better than that.
And I'm just real quick, because this will kind of transition into some props that we had. I mentioned Terrence Mann as well there. So Odd Shopper, again, No House Advantage has his line at 2.5 rebounds for Terrence Mann. Odd Shopper has it bumped up to 3.5. The books here, I'm in Philly now in PA looking at a couple of different books. And granted, it's juiced to the over, but we talked about that there are times in which you just place a bet knowing that it's going to hit. And there are plenty of times in which you can justify a 2-for-1, lay 2 units to make 1 or whatever it is that you apply there to make something back. So again, yes, it's juiced a little to the over, but it's sitting at 3.5. And we've told everybody, I mean, again, so from Odd Shopper to your local book to No House Advantage, I'm going over 3.5 rebounds for Terrence Mann all day tonight, Ryan.
I love it. And I expect those minutes to be there as well. Mid-30s minutes, potentially. Low 30s like he did last game out. That's a great pathway for hitting that over on rebounds. And Terrence Mann, someone who's active, he hustles. So definitely, I love that over bet on those rebounds. And yeah, we have that projected as well. So yeah, I definitely will be riding that prop as well.
Sneaky one here, but you actually have some really good return on it. And again, looking at the difference with Odd Shopper and then looking at a couple of local books here in PA, it's juice to the under and you get plus money on the over. And this is all about minutes, but Jay Crowder over 1.5 assists tonight. Getting 2 assists for a guy who doesn't foul out shouldn't be too difficult if he's out there. Now, look, I do expect to sweat this out. I don't expect him to drop. This is not me confident in Trae Young dropping 15 dimes that didn't happen last night. But I am confident that Crowder with minutes out there can get me 2 assists. That's really the baseline here. 2 assists, and it's plus 105 on the return. So it's a low number. And if you don't like the over, then I would just stay away from it. But I do think that there's a pretty good path to get to 2 assists, assuming Crowder just doesn't foul out again.
Yeah. I end up those minutes really are rooting for, and he can just fall in some easy, I don't know, throwing it down to Eytan for some for a quick dunk, or finding Booker or Paul open for a 3. Yeah, I already listed off 2 assists. So yeah, I think that's not bad. Not bad. Hopefully that works out.
Yep. We'll split. How about that? We'll split the earnings.
All right.
This is a Mr. July. I love this, by the way. Reggie Specs, right? And we have the higher owned option in Reggie Jackson. I know a lot of people are going to get to Patrick Beverly as well because of cost. But you look at what we have here, it's a big number. It's just a big number in general. To get to 20 points in a playoff game, if you're not the stud on the team, especially in tighter games, it's tough. Now, we've seen Reggie be able to put up some points in spurts. It's not going to be a shock if he were able to get 12 points, let's say, in a quarter and aid that. But 19.5 points I see as his over-under. Odd Shopper has a 63% X-win factor of that going under. It is juiced on the books to the under a little bit. I'm inclined to go under, although I do feel like he's a great DFS play and probably can have a really good game tonight, but that doesn't necessarily rely on him dropping over 20 points. I don't know if you see that another way, maybe where Reggie drops a bunch tonight, and that would be a good play to go over.
So, yeah, Reggie Jackson, yeah, it's just I'm also with the under. I think Chris Paul is just not going to let him light him up.
Yeah.
I just think Chris Paul's like, I'm not going to get Rec Spec Reggie to light me up. He got outplayed. Chris Paul got outplayed by Reggie Jackson in the second half last game. And CP3 is just the competitor in CP3 will not let that happen. It's just, I know Reggie Jackson, the shot volume is obviously very promising for him, but I just don't think CP3 is going to let that happen 2 games in a row. Is
there any, before we hit people with the optimal lineup, is there a couple of punt options and even back in the captain mode, I think, to look at that on DK? And I don't know if we're going as low as, Dario Saric, Craig, something along those lines. Clearly, we know the advantage of being able to work these guys in. The Clippers have a couple, even if you are working a little bit higher with Mann or even Beverly for that matter. Kennard, we saw get minutes, so he probably would be the go-to, at least popular punt for a captain on the Clippers side. But I don't know if it's a Dario Saric, if it's somebody like that who's workable in the captain mode now.
It's playing a cheap guy like Dario Saric at a captain spot will be tough. I think he's an okay utility spot. I just think you're sacrificing so many raw points and out of the studs where it's going to tough to make up that ground. Well, a guy like Patrick Beverly. So I had some captain lineups with him. It didn't really work out last time. You really needed Zubac in your captain spot, but Beverly, those minutes, high 20s minutes, he's being a hound with Booker. I don't mind it. He doesn't need to be spectacular at 3,800. There's a lot of ways that he can be fine. And it'll be interesting to see if that optimal lineup has Patrick Beverly. So I think we can get started with that optimal lineup, shall we?
Let's do it. We're on our way out, and let's look at. I mean, the lineup I have with Beverly as a captain has Beverly, and then we get to everybody else, all the studs, including Zubac. So let's begin. Who's your captain?
Captain on DraftKings. I think there's enough merit to go to Paul George. So we'll do Paul George.
Okay, so let me take the easy name out and say we're going to spend the 4,200 on Zubac, right?
All right, Zubac. That works. Paul George, Zubac. I like. Can we go? Yeah, we could do. Showing up in our on the Awesemo projections right now. Patrick Beverly falls in there. So Patrick Beverly is right now in the optimal lineup. So Pat Bev is in that optimal.
As a utility. So we have George, Zubac, now Patrick Beverly in there. So boy, I wonder. I'm gonna go with Mann. I'm gonna throw Terrence Mann in there at 4,400.
Sounds good. And then this is where things get interesting.
Yeah, that's why we leave it to you, man. You think I'm gonna be left holding the anchor here? No, that's you.
So I like Chris Paul, and there's enough salary to get up to Devin Booker on this the lineup we're building. So that ends up being that optimal right now. So it's going to be a highly duped lineup. It seems like the safest cash game lineup out there. If you go through it top through bottom, all those guys look like pretty solid options. There are a lot of boxes check off for them. Minutes. They're all starters, which is really rare to fit on a one game showdown slate. So yeah, we'll see. And one thing you can do with this lineup is just pivoting off of one player here or there, just mixing and matching a little bit. So keep that in mind. And I think producer Chris will be writing this lineup.
I am too. I am too. And I'll make the same deal where if I win anything of note here, and you can classify of note however you want, the kickback, I mean, we have to kick something back to Rinpack here, all right? And I guess I could take credit. Like if Terrence, watch, this is what's going to happen. This lineup's going to go optimal, and then Terrence Mann is going to be the only cold guy there, but it won't matter because everybody else blows up. And then you're going to come back and be like, see, Shander, we didn't even need your Terrence Mann.
Yeah, I know the things. It's an interesting lineup. looking at other like top lineups, I think this lineup you can land on 5 starters, 5 to 6 starters. So that's been fun.
Awesome.
Another fun show, Eytan. I think it's yeah.
Absolutely, brother. Yeah, we're on our way out again. Emac and Terry coming your way next for MLB Strategy Show. Great stuff. Make sure you hit us up with some likes here and share to the world, whatever social media platform you're on, and subscribe. And once you subscribe to the channel, thank you to Rinpack. Thank you to Chris. Thank you out there for being a part of another NBA Strategy Show. Again, don't go anywhere on the channel. We've got MLB, MMA coming up right now. So you're jammed with content. Have a great day.